Well, Shawnee, thanks so much for joining me today on the Minimalist Moms podcast.
Thank you so much, Diane, for having me on today. It's such an honor. I've been one of your followers for years, and connecting with another mom in the great state of Ohio is also fun too.
Oh my gosh, I know you told me that you were up in Cleveland right when we got on the call. And I will say, to give listeners a little bit of insight, I feel bad that you've listened for years and now you've seen the chaos, what happens behind the scenes of what this recording is like. So apologies.
It's all good. It's all real life, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're about: keeping it real and keeping it simple.
Yes, absolutely, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And I think that is the funny thing is that I am just a mom trying to get this information out to other moms because I know how much value I've gained in my life from minimalism, intentional living. I'm trying to live more of a intentional life at this point. I've decluttered the thing. So you're here today to help us with more of the mindset behind why we live an intentional life. And we're going to talk a lot about wellness today. But before we get there, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners and then we'll get started.
For sure. So I am Shanika Esparaz. I am a double board certified physician. So initially, I was trained in ophthalmology. So I focus on all things eye health and vision, eye surgery. And then several years into practice, I realized that with many of my patients, we were missing kind of addressing the root cause of why they were coming to see me, why they were losing vision, which often had to do with their lifestyle, their health, and well being. And so I got another certification in a field called lifestyle medicine, where we actually learn things we should have learned in medical training in terms of how to use your own lifestyle to really reduce your risk of chronic disease, even treat and prevent chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, even cancer, obesity, and mental health conditions. So that's kind of what started me down this pathway of really figuring out, how do we keep ourselves well and healthy? And then I also kind of did that extra certification for selfish reasons. I became a mom. I'm a mom of two little girls. My husband's in medicine as well, and we just lead very busy lives. And so, like you, Diane, I was like, you know what? I need to get really intentional about how I'm treating my body, what I'm nourishing my body with, the how I'm treating my mind. So that's why I went down this health and wellness path and wanted to really find the evidence behind what works well. And what I found is it's actually not as complicated as we sometimes make it seem.
Yes, absolutely. You said how you didn't necessarily learn that when you were going to medical school, just how to holistically treat the body. I am curious just for some insight, not to throw anyone under the bus because I so appreciate doctors, but I think that's one of my I don't know how to say this. Like one of my issues with modern medicine is that doctors aren't necessarily trained to holistically treat the body. And I don't know if that's because people specialize in certain parts. So maybe that's dietetics where it's like, oh, go see a dietitian. I'm not going to focus on that. But I think that everything could improve the heart, the lungs, the eyes, if, like you said, we were treating everything that we're doing in life in that way. I guess I don't really have a question. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, in medical training, it's very prescriptive based, right? We're trained to figure out what's going on as quickly as possible and treat
Mm.
it with medications or surgery. And I hope that the culture of medicine shifts, the culture of Western medicine shifts over the next several years as there's a lot more wellness influencers out there because I think there are different ways to approach health and well-being. And what we're starting to learn is that by addressing things in your own lifestyle, like you can use your own lifestyle. You don't necessarily always need to jump to medications and procedures. I think there's certainly a role for that, as a surgeon myself, but I think there's other things that you can start doing at home today to serve your health and well-being. And again, approaching it from a whole body perspective. And you're right, a lot of us in medicine have become specialized and then super specialized. I myself am specifically a retina specialist, so I specialize on one layer of the eye. But I'm hoping that more and more healthcare providers get extra training in treating patients holistically because I think we could prevent, misdiagnosis or being on multiple medications or catch things earlier and prevent things if we took a whole person perspective.
Yes, and I know this is a bigger can of worms than we have to go into today because I am appreciative of those super specialized abilities to know the body. I'm so grateful we live in a time that we know exactly how the retina works and that you can help with all those little details as opposed to just, oh, I know about the eye and I can do as much as I can. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I always kind of wondered that too. The more I get into health and wellness, I've always just had that consideration as well. So, anyways, as we move into our conversation, we are going to talk about simplifying our wellness routine. It is something that I've touched on the podcast before, but you are a believer in not complicating it, keeping it evidence based, and making it make sense, especially for moms that don't have a lot of extra. Maybe it's energy we can give to these things. We just want to not overcomplicate. So, how do you want to start the conversation? You have this lifestyle guide you've recently written. Do you want to go through maybe just some of the areas in which we
Sure.
overcomplicate?
Right, right. Yeah, I would be happy to, and I'm happy to share this guide with your listeners because again, I think it's been helpful for myself and the other women I coach and my patients as well, and even my kids. It all comes
Mhm.
back to, what am I doing for myself and how can I keep my family and kids healthy as well? So, in terms of when we look at lifestyle medicine, so how do we use our own lifestyle to improve our well-being? And it's based on actually six different pillars. One pillar is a whole food, plant based nutrition. A lot of people hear, oh, okay, so that means vegan. Not necessarily. I think there's multiple ways to approach nutrition, and we can go into that a little bit deeper. So, one is nutrition, two is physical activity, three is restorative sleep, four is actually positive social connection. And I think this is underemphasized, especially in medicine. Five is stress management. And six is avoidance of risky behaviors like using alcohol and tobacco. But in the guide, I also go into talking about risky behaviors that especially busy moms might fall into, some traps we might fall into. So yeah, let's dive into it. The first kind of thing we talk about in terms of lifestyle medicine and using your own lifestyle to be healthy and well is nutrition.
Mhm.
How are we nourishing ourselves and our kids? Because we can actually view food as medicine, which I think is incredible. Like something in your fridge could actually help reduce your risk of cancer or heart disease, especially if those things run in your family. And
Mhm.
so when I say keep nutrition simple, again, we sometimes think, okay, do I need to be intermittent fasting or vegan? Or do I need to do keto to lose weight to be healthy? And one of the things I came across in my certification and research is that we actually, in this age of nutritionism, we actually have to make over 200 nutrition decisions in a day. We don't think about it, but that's a lot of decisions we make. And so I try to make it really simple. Focus on getting more plants into your diet, and that will improve your nutrition greatly. And why do I say plants? So plants in and of themselves are, we can think of them as having their own microbiome, their own organism, right? They grow out of the ground. Plants include fruits and vegetables. We also include whole grains in that category as well. And so the more
Mhm.
plants we're getting into our bodies, the more nutrition we're getting. It's better for our gut microbiome, which many of your followers may have heard about. That's really nourishing the healthy bacteria in our gut.
Mhm.
And so getting more and more plants in our diet, it's actually, some people think, okay, do I need to, become totally vegetarian? No. Studies have shown going from just eating no plants to eating 2.5 plants per day can actually significantly reduce your risk of heart disease. So what
Mhm.
I tell my patients is just start by adding one vegetable a week. Try a new veggie, try a new fruit with your kids. Just including more plants in your diet can go a long, long way.
You're convicting me because I used to eat salads every day. Probably when I had one child, and now that I have three, I'm just like trying to stay. I pretty much eat the same exact thing every day. So I'm a creature of habit.
Mm.
I enjoy doing that, but I also know that it's good to have variation. And you're talking about plants. I'm thinking even in our herb garden that we have, just how medicinal herbs can be. I mean, that's maybe a little bit of Eastern medicine, but even including herbs that we can grow at home, even if we have to do it inside by a window, I think that's simple things like that are kind of enjoyable on the slowing down and stress part of my life. Doing things like gardening, or like baking from scratch, like those types of things help with stress relief. So we might be killing two birds with one stone, so to speak.
I love that. You are approaching nutrition mindfully with, like you said, subconsciously. Like the more that you're involved in it, whether you're growing it, whether your kids are seeing, touching it, cutting it.
Mhm.
Actually, gardening has been shown to be, great for our gut microbiome as well because we're naturally exposing ourselves to more and more organisms,
Yeah.
diversifying our own healthy, gut microbiome as well. And you're right, we can use herbs, we can use, things like garlic and onion too. Those are sulfur containing foods that produce glutathione. I don't want to get
Mm.
too biologic here, but glutathione, which is a natural antioxidant. So a lot of people are like, do I need to go on like a detox diet or anything like that? I mean, those things are just not sustainable. You go on those things and drink celery juice for a week and yeah, maybe you shed some weight, but do you actually feel good?
Yeah.
And would you want your kids doing that as well?
Hmm.
And so that's why I look at, what are natural ways to detox with food? So herbs, like you mentioned, garlic and onion, spices like turmeric and coriander have great
Yeah.
antioxidants. Fermented foods, again, going back to the gut microbiome, and then cruciferous veggies like cabbage, broccoli, and Brussels help with natural detoxification in our liver. So again, using what's in our fridge, our pantry as medicine and even detoxifying.
Before we get into the next one that you have, one of the next pillars that you have for us, I have to ask because you're an ophthalmologist, what is something we can add to our diet nutritionally that is beneficial for the eyes? Or is that something that you can't necessarily like? I know people try and target belly fat, and it's kind of like, well, we're going to target the whole body. But is there something that we can specifically do for the eye? I'm just curious.
Thank you for asking that question. So, yes, there are lots of studies looking at what sorts of foods can protect those cells that are in the center of our vision and the center of our retina, which is called macula. You may have heard of a condition called macular degeneration, which is a very common condition where the center of your vision ages. And we usually see that in our 60s to 70s, but there are things we can do in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s leading up to that. And so the vegetables I recommend for your retina, again, we often think carrots. Carrots are great, but actually things like green leafy vegetables like kale, broccoli, and spinach have a component in them called lutein, which is a pigment that actually protects our retina, and it's not something we can produce on our own. So I say focus on dark green leafy veggies and also omega 3s, especially the omega 3s in seafood, penetrate the retina really well and provide antioxidant and sort of anti aging properties for our vision.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that tip. I kind of want to go through the next two quickly just to not be redundant if my listeners do know about physical activity and sleep. I want to make sure we really talk about those last three, but the next one is
Mm.
physical activity. Any big game changers here that we can incorporate?
So you just want to make sure that you're getting in regular and consistent movement. And our technical guidelines are 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity. So you can count chasing a toddler, inclined walking. It doesn't mean you have to be, pounding it away at cycling or running. There's different ways to get movement in. And then also weight training, I'd like to emphasize, especially in women starting in their 30s, we do start losing some muscle mass. And so incorporating at least two strength training sessions about 30 minutes in length is important. And then in terms of sleep, I think that's an underutilized tool, especially as a busy mom. That can be hard to get consistent sleep, especially with littles who like to wake you up. But if possible, we like to aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Sleep is a great restorer in terms of improving our alertness, actually improving our calorie burn during the day. Your listeners may have heard of increased insulin resistance with poor sleep. So I really like to emphasize that as well.
Yeah, again, not to minimize nutrition, activity, and sleep, but I think most of us are like, okay, maybe I need to make some changes there. Again, your guide goes into a little bit more depth. And again, the science based evidence is helpful as well. But let's focus on these last three. The next one is positive social connection. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so a lot of this stems out of research in positive psychology. Robert Waldinger is a Harvard professor who looked at the healthiest and happiest 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, and 100-year-olds across the world. And what he found was loneliness kills. And so that's where this research started coming from. And we found that surrounding yourself with positive social connections, whether it's a phone call or whether it's
Yeah.
some type of friend or family interaction daily, can make a huge impact on our longevity and our happiness. It increases those feel good hormones, endorphins and dopamine. And again, we just really underutilize this natural and free way to improve our health and well-being.
People think you have to have a ton of friends, but even if you have one really close friend that you're touching base with, it's so important. I touch base with my sister every morning, and it really does make a difference to my day. If there's something that I need to process or something that I'm going through in parenting, it's just so nice to vent, get it off our chest. And I don't know, there's just something to be said about that. And I think going into the next one, it helps with my stress management. So, stress management is the next one. What are some of your tips here?
Yeah, so I think it's important, number one, to realize that there's good stress and then there's like bad stress in our life or negative stress. And stress actually, it's just a natural part of our life. Stress can be enhancing, if you're performing or working on a presentation, you have the cortisol pumping to get a presentation done, but it's something you're excited about. And then there's bad stress that can really bring down our day. And those are the curveballs or challenges or complications we encounter at work or something that comes up with our kids that we didn't expect. Those types of stress that when we realize, what is in our control and what is not in our control, again, simplifying it. When you're thrown a curveball, that's usually the first thing I ask myself or even my kids, is this something within our control? Yes or no? And then if it's no, we recognize the stress. You can label it. That's another term in positive psychology, kind of labeling the stress. And then you can put it aside. This is not something I can control. I cannot change this outcome. Let us put it aside. We're not ignoring it. We're recognizing it, but we're also recognizing our limitations as humans, as parents. And then there's stress, there's negative stress that we can, control. We can control our reactions to it. And this is where that term mindfulness comes into play. And I think mindfulness, it's such a great thing that we're talking and learning more about, especially as busy moms. But what does mindfulness actually mean? And it's really about being open and creative in times of stress, reacting mindfully rather than mindlessly, which we all have our moments where we, yell at our kid or we snap at somebody, and that happens. Again, we're human, but how can we more mindfully approach these curveball situations, and so really working on your mindset in these situations and thinking what's in my control and what's not in my control, I think is a good starting point.
Yes, absolutely. I saw something this morning. Maybe you've heard it before. It's changing what
Oh,
if,
okay.
even
Hmm.
if, even if that happens, like how will I go through
Hmm.
it? And maybe that wasn't the one that I saw. I'm like doing a quick Google search right now. But just it keeps us out of that worrying state and allows us to kind of go through it and see how we would process, not just being at such a reactive, overwhelmed state of mind, but even if we're just switching our brain to say, even if that happens, how will I continue to be good? How will I continue to look on the bright side? Even if it feels like the darkest of days, how am I going to overcome? So kind of like giving yourself that power, taking some of the power back from the
Right.
worry, I think is really important. It helps me to stay mindful of just kind of like seeing myself through the bad circumstance that I think might happen, just kind of like walking myself all the way through it. Even if that happens, what would be true still, or what would
Hmm.
remain?
I love that. And using that with your kids too can can really help.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. The last one is surprising to me. Not surprising, but I'm glad that you included it. So you say avoid risky behaviors. You mentioned alcohol or tobacco, but you have some other things listed here. Do you want to go into more depth?
Yeah, for sure. So, in traditional lifestyle medicine with our patients, we're often talking about risk factor modification for chronic diseases. And a big one is tobacco. Over the last 20, 30 years, we've realized, how bad cigarette smoking and tobacco is for us. And there is also emerging evidence on the role of alcohol and brain health and dementia. And so I think those are well known, things. But I think some things that we less often pay attention to, especially as women, as busy moms, is are there risky behaviors in our day to day that are slipping past us? And a big one is people pleasing. I think this is a huge one, especially in my field, especially for women. That's just how we're groomed. We're groomed to say yes instead of no, to be polite, to think of others first. We are natural caregivers. We're moms. We put others' needs before ours. And so we are people pleasing a lot more than we know. We're saying yes in many instances when maybe we should be saying no. And I think this comes back to, again, living an intentional and simpler life. When you look at your calendar, for the upcoming week or month, is there any kind of blank space for you to just be, to just relax, to create, to enjoy life, the fruits of your hard labor? And if you're finding yourself getting bogged down in pleasing other people, setting up more commitments, whether it's at home or at work or your kids' school, how much is that serving you and your priorities? So avoiding, saying yes when you should be saying no. And then another one is this concept of arrival fallacy, which I often see, especially for busy moms, working professional women, is we tend to delay our happiness. I will be happy when I reach this point in my career. I will be happy when, XYZ happens. And so we're constantly giving the choice of our happiness to some external event in the future. And we're constantly waiting and working and grinding. And then it's like, oh, wait, I'm in my, 70s and 80s and I'm retired and kids are out of the house. Am I happy?
Hmm.
When are we truly going to be happy? And I think, if we can start shifting our mindset to find pockets of happiness within our day to day, what makes me happy now, or what can I do more of? I don't need to keep waiting for some undefined circumstance in the future that's maybe not within my control to be happy.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are listening to you and I have this conversation and thinking, I'm just too busy. I don't have time to make these changes, or I can't make changes in all of these areas. How would you encourage those women saying that?
I would start, and some people look at me funny when I say this, I would start with journaling.
Mm.
Journaling can look different for everybody. When I first started journaling, I got out like a blank piece of note paper and I started writing and I was like, what am I doing? This feels weird. So journaling is different for everybody. I've now used kind of a journal that has prompts in it. I like the 5 minute journal. I'm not sponsored or anything like that, but I truly have enjoyed using that because it gives you more focus. But I think when you journal, it forces busy moms, busy women to slow down. And actually, when you journal, you reflect daily or most days of the week on what went well and what do you want to see for the next day. What are the positive things that maybe you didn't notice because you were so busy during the day, but you're sitting down either at the end of the day or beginning of the day reflecting. And so I think that's a really easy and simple place to start with living more intentionally and actually finding out like, hey, the best part of my day was when I dropped my daughter off and she turned around, she remembered to wave at me. And writing that down, I mean, it brings these positive emotions, these endorphins, these dopamine, oxytocin. It helps rewire our brain to be happier with what we actually already have.
Absolutely. That's a great word. Well, where can listeners find you, connect with you online? And again, I'll be sure to include this PDF in the show notes for listeners, but where else can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at Shani, Shani _ Esperaz, Esparaz, MD. And on there, there's links to my blog with some free resources. And again, my free guide that takes you through all these simple evidence-based lifestyle tips for your health and well-being.
Awesome. Well, if you've listened before, you know that I ask all my guests two questions at the end. And my first question I have to ask you is what has been a beneficial resource in your life, we'll say other than journaling, that you would like to share with the listeners?
Oh, okay. So a beneficial resource that I've found has actually just been doing like at home workouts.
Cool.
I never can like find time to get to the gym. And so I have like one resource that I've found is actually I'll share two. One are these free YouTube workouts by Heather Robertson.
Okay.
They're great. They're free. They're on YouTube. She has a variety of things that, because literally all I have time to do is like lift some weights at home and, get going. And another one is Stay Fit Virtual. That one is paid monthly subscription. I'm not sponsored, but again, just easy, simple workouts that you can get done at home. So that's been helpful for my health and well-being.
Yes, absolutely. It's funny that when you have any type of platform, you have to be like, I'm not sponsored by them. You feel like you have to say it, but it's just
Yeah.
like, I just love this product, but also I'm
Yeah.
happy to be sponsored by someone that I love.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Well, my last question is what is something you can't stop talking about?
Mm, what is something I can't stop? Um, I love my water bottle. You can get it on Amazon. So one of my New Year's resolutions was to drink more water because life gets away from you during the day. And so I love this water bottle because it literally has a timestamp. So by 9 o'clock, drink to this line, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and then it resets for the afternoon. So love this water bottle. Keeps me on track with actually keeping up with my water intake during the day.
What did you say it was called?
The water bottle, it's a Narrabun. It's a 32-ounce water bottle and it's on Amazon.
Perfect. Well, I'll be sure to include everything that we talked about today in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me and being willing to help women in such a way. I'm so glad that people are talking about a holistic approach to the body and not just first and foremost medicating or needing surgery. I just appreciate anyone talking about lifestyle change. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Diane. It was an honor and pleasure.